accept this award on behalf of my partner and comrade in peace, President Isaias Afwerki, whose goodwill, trust. I accept this award.
Arms crossed, outstretched, symbolising a desperate cry for freedom. Channel 4 News has obtained these images from Eritrean migrants and refugees imprisoned in a Libyan government-run detention centre near the town of Zintan. Homemade banners written with tomato paste daubed on blankets spell out their plight. These people say they are slowly being killed while the world turns its back. Channel 4 News previously has covered these detention camps. They are where Europe-bound migrants caught at sea by the EU-funded Libyan Coast Guard are locked up. In some cases, corrupt guards conspire with human traffickers to abuse the detainees for ransom using social media. Other centres have been directly attacked by local militia seeking to rob or press gang the inmates to fight. Despite all this,
in a message directed to the Egyptian people, the Ethiopian Prime Minister gave few words in Arabic. He swore to God that he will not harm Egypt's share of the Nile's water.
Welcome to the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam hydroelectric project.
Semenya Bakala was the mastermind behind Ethiopia's ambitious hydropower plan. Still under construction and with a $4.8 billion price tag, the Grand Renaissance Dam is at the heart of Ethiopia's bid to become Africa's biggest exporter of power and shore up its economic future. It's a source of pride for many in Ethiopia, but outside the country it's controversial. Bakala's sudden death drew crowds and raised suspicions. Some protesters believe he's been murdered.
We will not be silent over the death of a person that we hold in such high regard, and we feel great sorrow for his loss.
They would say that they would have most loyalty to their tribe, they felt like that was their identity. Then it was Africa, and then it was Ethiopia. When he was back a month ago, the same people said, I now have strongest identity as an Ethiopian, and then African, and then tribe third. How have you managed to change this in 7 months? I think other leaders could learn. Maybe even in Europe, huh?
Now, live from Ethiopia's capital in Addis Ababa, actually joins us by the phone. Leah, what more do we know about the assassination?
It's a national day of mourning as Ethiopia bids farewell to its military chief. General Sahara Makonnen was killed on Saturday, shot dead by his bodyguard in his own home. Makonnen was in the process of stopping a regional rebellion in the northern Amhara state when he was killed. Another general was also shot and killed. Thousands attended the funeral service for both generals, including friends of General Makonnen.
I cannot finish telling you all he has done for me. My wish for his family and the Ethiopian people is that they can be consoled, especially for the people of Tigray. Now we are always crying.
5 government officials were killed in the failed rebellion. 2 were federal generals, 3 were regional state leaders. The man behind the
Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed appeared on state television saying that the coup failed and that it was stopped within an hour. He also said that his chief of staff, Sahara Makonnen, the man that was assassinated, was working to control the situation. Makonnen, he would have been in charge of ordering security forces to take action.
The UAE has been mediating between the two neighbors. This is part of its strategy in the Horn of Africa in the last few years. The Emirates has been involved in the area as it tackles rising security concerns from Yemen and naval threats and piracy in the Horn of Africa. The UAE forces in Yemen concentrate on fighting Houthis in the south and countering terrorist groups as Al-Qaeda. The volatile developments threaten Bab el-Mandab waterway, where the majority of Gulf oil to Europe passes on a daily basis. Eritrea agreed to host a UAE military base in 2016 in return for huge economic aid and investments. The base is aimed at protecting the Gulf oil interests in the region. However, this has angered Eritrea's rivals Ethiopia, which feared the military power would be used against it. The UAE and Saudi Arabia intervened to broker an unexpected peace between the two Horn of Africa nations. The breakthrough has been hailed by top officials in the Gulf as it would create stability needed to be able to concentrate on the war in Yemen and counter terrorism. On this basis, the UAE leaders delivered the Zayed Medal to Isaias Afwerki and Abiy Ahmed.
People in the Tigray region of northern Ethiopia voted in an election that Ethiopia's federal government said was unconstitutional and illegal. The government had postponed nationwide polls that were due last month because of the coronavirus pandemic. But some Tigrayan voters say they were being deprived of their democratic rights.
I believe it is lawful to hold elections every 5 years. It is in the law. It is very important because it means being governed by a legitimate government elected by the people.
The Tigrayan People's Liberation Front is widely supported here. It dominates the regional state council.
The federal government had every right to deploy federal security forces.
Ethiopia is now at war with itself.
Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed says the army has been ordered to move on the capital of the northern Tigray region in what he's calling the final phase of the offensive. Some 500,000 residents of the capital, Mekelle, have been warned to stay indoors. The move comes just hours after an ultimatum expired for regional leaders to surrender to the central government. The UN is warning it's running low on essential supplies for the nearly 1 million people who've been displaced by the conflict. Our correspondent Mariel Muller reports.
We are only 80 kilometers away from the Ethiopian border into the region of Tigray, where heavy fighting still continues. This UN camp, called Kuba camp, once housed refugees who fled Ethiopia's famine in the 1980s. Now the camp is expected to house several thousand refugees, as the UN Refugee Agency told us. Many more than the original capacity of 6,000. People here are desperate, they tell us. Water, food and shelter are scarce. Some of them have to sleep on the ground, are struggling to get enough food or medical aid. The new refugees crossing the border to Sudan worry aid groups. A representative told us we are unable to respond to a growing influx.
Kuba camp once housed refugees who fled Ethiopia's famine in the 1980s. Now some 9,000 people have saved themselves once again, but this time it's because of war. In this hospital, people wait for hours before receiving treatment. Like Agare. She, her baby and her father escaped the war in the Tigrayan town of Humera.
In the first 7 months during which the Ethiopian government forces and allied troops from Eritrea controlled the Tigray region, they have committed the most horrendous war crimes, including weaponized sexual violence, massacres, man-made starvation. The conflict has killed thousands and left over 9 million people in humanitarian disaster.
Our Africa correspondent Leila Nathu's report contains images that some will find very disturbing.
Armed men in uniform leading a group towards a cliff edge. Bodies appear strewn across the ground. A man is urged to throw one off the cliff. These graphic videos and others like it were passed to the BBC and began circulating.
I think that what has happened in Ethiopia has been something very difficult to handle from the point of view of the international community. Ethiopia always resisted to any foreign interference. In the Security Council, there is a clear division about Ethiopia. So it has not been easy for all of us to work. I've been in contact.
He gave a crash course on Chinese foreign policy. Listen to this. China adheres to the principle of non-interference in internal affairs. We do not meddle in the internal affairs of Ethiopia. And we also oppose any external forces interference in the internal affairs of Ethiopia. We'll talk about double standards. Last we checked, Wang Yi is not an Ethiopian citizen. He is the foreign minister of China, another country. He is visiting Ethiopia. He's siding with the government in a civil war, ignoring war crimes, and then talking about non-interference.
It's Abiy Ahmed, the prime minister who you mentioned. He's invited in Eritrean troops, but also Turkey, Russia, China, all involved in the war in Ethiopia right now.
Iran, Turkey, the UAE, China, all of these people provided military support in the form of drones, primarily in training on how to use drones. Russia and China have successfully blocked any conversation at the UN around these atrocious human rights abuses that are happening in Tigray.
Bahara Maskal says control of the strategic Horn of Africa and the Red Sea is the goal. For example, Russia is currently building a military base in Eritrea.
Winenberg has been studying satellite imagery collected by the U.S. company Planet Lab. He determined that drones operated by the UAE are stationed at the Aircham port city of Aseb. The 20-meter wingspan Chinese-made drones known as Wing Long 2 are capable of dropping bombs or shooting missiles. The Ethiopian government said it has conducted targeted strikes against strategic targets in Tigray region, but did not say whether the strikes were made by fighter jets or some other area.
For the third time this week, Mekele, the capital of Ethiopia's Tigray region, is bombarded by the National Army. The government said the strikes were targeting military installations of the TPLF, the rebel movement Addis Ababa has been at war with since November.
I was in the store and I didn't hear the jet coming. All of a sudden I heard the explosion. There was 2 of us in the store and I was asleep on the floor when I heard the explosion. People picked me up off the ground, and when the explosions continued, I went out and saw a person that I know injured on the ground.
The rebels quickly gained control of the region when the conflict started, but a ceasefire was signed this summer. However, since then, fighting has resumed and even spread to neighboring regions. 2 weeks ago, the central government launched a massive counteroffensive. Ethiopia's ally, the United States, denounced the latest round of airstrikes on Wednesday.
Some of the children in this hospital ward traveled for weeks to get here after being shot, knifed, or hit by shrapnel in the ongoing war in Ethiopia's Tigray region. 15-year-old Bariha Gebre has lost one eye and is permanently blind in the other.
She and her cousin went out to play in the yard. Suddenly, they saw people running. They also ran and they were both shot.
It took Gebre weeks to get to this hospital in the regional capital, Makala, as they traveled from town to town, trying to find a clinic to treat her. He says everywhere he went, he found health centers destroyed and looted. After the fighting stopped, the nurse for this clinic in Edega Hamas returned to find a burnt-out tank, bullet-riddled signs, and dead soldiers on the streets. Like so many others, her clinic was empty.
Just I came and the door is opened, the glass are broken, and the equipment are stolen. Nothing here.
Patients, including children and victims of rape, still come to her with war injuries. But there is very little she can do.
Emergency medicines were there. It was stolen, and some is here. Infusions and dressing, suturing, all the equipments are stolen here.
Tefatowicz says she refers patients to the few hospitals in the main cities where medical workers say they are short of supplies in every department. In the Eider Hospital in Mekele, some children say losing their limbs has been less painful than losing their loved ones.
My older brother was with me. He was injured and died.
The Ethiopian government says it takes very seriously its responsibility to alleviate the suffering of the people in the Tigray region. The government blames the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front for the war that began last November after a coordinated attack on its forces in the region. But many people in Tigray say the region is under attack from federal forces, Eritrean forces, and Amhara militias.
More than 40 churches have been destroyed. We know that in one massacre alone, 78 priests were killed in just one massacre. And there have been dozens and dozens of massacres that have happened in Tigray, and mostly at churches and on religious holidays.
It seems that Eritrea is exporting its brutal attitude towards Christians to Tigray. In November 2020, Eritrean forces killed up to 800 civilians in the sacred city of Aksum, including, according to Orthodox Church sources, at least 78 priests. And a former prisoner of the regime, Helen Bahani, says the killing of Christians is continuing in Tigray.
It's overflow from Eritrea to go to Tigray, and they kill a lot of priests, Some of them, they stand with their cross, so they cut their hands. They ask them to remove their hat. So when they say no, they shoot them. There are hundreds priests die in this conflict by Eritrean soldiers. Also, priests' wives, they rape them. I don't know why the world is silent. I don't understand really.